Right, greetings, hello, it's Thomas Staffan here speaking, and it's my Sunday thoughts of the day. So we're going to be commenting on some issues that have been going on this week from a spiritual, intellectual history type of perspective, bringing in philosophy and ethics and so on. As normal, began as a weekly Sunday fast against Brexit, and but now there's a whole bunch of other things that I'm fasting against. So this is like my Ramadan spread out over the whole year. Instead of just doing 1 month of fasting, I'm doing every week, just one day. So and you're very welcome to join me. It certainly clears the mind, and it means you can focus on what really matters in life, which is weighing up the ethical narrative that's being enacted in front of us, and we're seeing this in world affairs. We've had floods and terrible forest fires in California. Friends of mine, hopefully surviving, but a lot of devastation. We've had floods in other parts of the world. And then we have the problems of Brexit still, unravelling in front of us, and the moral incapacity and ignorance of the current Conservative government, so-called Conservative government. They're not conserving anything. They're destructivists, led by a chief anarchist, occultist called Dominic Cummings. I mean, it's absolutely mind-boggling how the British Constitution is so weak. It can't flash red alert when it gets breached like this. Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson being planted by the help of very sinister forces. So, okay, so there we are. That's my kind of lead-in. Blessings on everyone. I hope you're okay. I mean, the COVID thing continues to rage on the planet, and the figures are not looking good. We're going to get a second spike in the UK probably, because everyone's glibly going back to school, pretending it's all over. We've had another spike in France. I mean, it's going to go up again because they're also going back to school, in my opinion. And in my opinion, this will not be sorted until we have a proper UN-led, bioweapons convention-led investigation of all the labs that could have made this. This is a military leak which needs investigating. Now, that's as far as I go in support of a certain narrative that's developing, which I'll come to shortly. And I suspend judgment on it. I mean, I don't know. We don't know if it's a military leak. We've seen some evidence against. I think humanity has the right to reason and to knowledge. And therefore we have a duty to actually action that. We have this bioweapons convention. It exists. It was drawn up. Let's action it. And then we can at least know why the planet is going down like this. What are we suffering from? Why the nations of the world won't action that is beyond me. Only a tiny little nation needs to say they suspect that this might have leaked from some military lab to then action the process. So I think, let's do it. And I'd be very happy to talk to anyone about the politics of that. As a Canadian citizen, as well as British citizen, I've tried to get the Canadian government under Trudeau to just request that the UN investigate. I still think that it's in our national interests as Canada to find out who caused this, because although Canada suffered not as badly at all as the US, it's a matter of human concern and compassion for all people that are suffering. 180,000 killed in the US alone of this disease, and 6 million have contracted it. The figures are horrendous. So, now, there is a narrative that says, no, it's a fake thing. And there were people out in Trafalgar Square over the weekend, yesterday, campaigning, that lockdown is all a fake, it's all a hoax. There is no virus, come out, it's all, the system. Now, I've seen the pandemic videos like everyone else. I've seen that narrative develop. I understand where it's coming from, this sort of panic, this kind of somebody's out to get us type feeling. But I think it's misjudged, and I think it's a false narrative. And I've watched with interest the work of Sacha Stone's kind of Truth Commission, which has helped launch that narrative, trying to go into it. And I've weighed up very carefully as a academic the pros and cons, and I've noted who they haven't invited to give evidence. So that it's very, very selective. You can build a case for anything. I could build a case that this has come from an alien attack on the planet, from alien invasion, from spaceships and all that. And if I invite a certain kind of people to give evidence, I'll convince you all that that's the case, because there are people that believe that, and there are people that can find evidence, and there are channelers that would confirm all that. So, whereas that's not how you do actual science and philosophy, that's not how you do actual reasoning. You invite people from different perspectives, with different narratives, different theories, and you then weigh and assess the rival evidence, and you do it very, very carefully, according to certain, tried and tested scientific formula. And in the case of something like this virus, we analyse it scientifically. There's labs capable of doing that, and then we action the Bioweapons Convention, which, this is a planetary-wide emergency. So what we don't do is go to Trafalgar Square and take our masks off, or like Trump has done, having his Republican cult meeting, all without masks. It's a sort of weird defiance. It's a sort of death cult, actually, that wants to. It shows courage. That's the virtue that Aristotle would say. Yeah, they're showing courage, but it's a foolish courage. And Aristotle pointed out that's not a virtue. Foolhardiness is foolish. It's also very selfish, because if I contract it through my foolish behaviour and then I spread it to other people, and then X number die, where's the virtue in that? Now, of course, it fits in. I noted with interest that David Icke was speaking at this thing yesterday, and David Icke and I go back a long way. I've been aware of his work as an academic. In his very first books, he started quoting the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and my alarm bells went off, obviously. He seems to rate the barrel of every single conspiracy theory since Abbé Baruel criticised the French Revolution as being caused by the Illuminati, which was a Freemasonic group based in Ingolstadt in Austria, run by a philosopher called Adam Weishaupt, who had no idea what he would later be accused of. He was simply an intellectual on the rational side of the work of 18th century Enlightenment intellectuals, typical of them, and in no way involved in conspiratorial, revolutionary, let's organise and chop the heads off kings type of movements. He was a very different kind of bloke, but the right wing at that time in European history seized on it as a sort of explanation. But to accuse Freemasonry of being behind the revolution is a bit like accusing water of getting me wet if I choose to go and jump in the lake. Freemasonry is part of the movement towards liberation of ideas that happened in the course of European history after the horrors of the 30 Years' War. If you studied history, as I have done, intellectual history, including Freemasonic religious history in Europe, that's my field, right? So I know how horrendous the 30 Years' War was. It was Catholics and Protestants at each other's throats in a barbaric slaughter for 30 years. It led to horrendous suffering on the part of both sides, all sides. And France got involved and started joining the slaughter. Sweden got involved, started joining the slaughter. They actually were on the same side because they were both against, or they thought, it was in their interests to be against the Austro-Hungarian or Holy Roman Empire, as it was called, which was allied with Catholicism and with Spain. So Spain got involved. And therefore the Dutch, of course, were on the other side, because Spain and Holland were still fighting this. They had an 80 Years' War going. So the 30 Years' War and the 80 Years' War became one giant battlefield, which then spread out across the world. And you had battles in, God knows, all over the East Indies, the Americas, islands in the Caribbean, and so on. And at the end of these 30 years of mutual slaughter, the people of Europe and the governments of Europe said, enough is enough. We've had enough. Let's stop slaughtering each other over religion, people. This is absurd. Let's grow up. So they finally signed in 1648 a thing called the Treaty of Westphalia and the Treaty of Munster. There were two, which dealt with, clause by clause, all the problems, like who got Lorraine, who got Alsace, who got this bit of the frontier, who got Pomerania, which was the kind of bit the Swedes had stolen on the southern Baltic shore, pinching it from Prussia, and who got, it was all dealt with rationally and very methodically by negotiators in Westphalia. And it was a historic treaty, 1648, very important date in European and world history. And it marked the beginning of the international system of international relations that we still have. From there to the UN is but a stone's throw. Because what Westphalia achieved was that nations could each choose their own religion, according to the faith of their people. So if this state wants to become Lutheran, that's fine. You can be Lutheran. If this state wants to be Catholic, that's fine. If this state wants to be Calvinist, that's fine too. And so there was the first recognition, a little glimmer of enlightenment triggering, that actually, peace is more important than my religious fanaticism or my ideological fanaticism, my kind of let's march to the death and get them fanaticism. So I'm a great believer in peace. This is why I'm a peace pragmatist, and this is why I teach peace studies, because that system that came into being at 1648 is worth defending. And out of it came the Enlightenment. Out of it came, Descartes was involved in that conflict. He was a witness at one of the big battles. And he was so disgusted with the whole story, he went off to Holland and tried to work out, using reason, what is truth? Where is God? What is space? What is time? He invented the calculus of, the geometric, Descartesian coordinate system. He didn't invent the calculus, that came later with Leibniz and Newton, but they were products of the same Enlightenment phase that Descartes helped kickstart. And I'm very proud of the fact that I'm speaking from near where Descartes came from. So that's what the Enlightenment was. And Freemasonry acted as a vehicle for sharing those ideas. If you look at Margaret Jacobs and other historians, a lot of these, pan-sophists, they're called, they believed in universal wisdom. They woke up after the slumber of religious dogmatism and fanaticism that had led to the horrors of the 30 Years' War and the 80 Years' War. And there were great Catholic thinkers, great Protestant intellectuals, great Lutherans, great Anglicans, great Calvinists. They all said, let's put the weapons down. Let's do some maths. Let's try and work out how you can understand life and society. And it led to a flourishing of these Freemasonic lodges, which enable people to come together in harmony from all different branches of faith. All different Christians could join and did, and also Jews could join. They were welcomed, and Lessing, one of the great German Enlightenment figures, wrote his great play Nathan the Wise, and Goethe, who was also a Freemason, agreed that the Jews should have, civil rights, civil equality. Napoleon brought that in France here with his Code Napoleon. Freemason to the core, Napoleon and his family were all, Freemasons. The irony is that the British Empire was built on this concept of tolerance and enlightenment at its best. The Scots had gone for the Enlightenment in a big way. Adam Smith and all the great intellectuals behind the Scottish Enlightenment were, realising you have to break through to a place of reason beyond bigotry and fanaticism and racism and intolerance. And Kant was another great exemplar in Germany of this searching after universal values. Well, so that's the heritage that I'm coming from the World Intellectual Forum, which is another kind of attempt to bring enlightenment, to the planet this time? How can we have a rational world order system? I mean, colleagues, Professor Glenn Martin and others have thought up constitutional arrangements for the planet, like a sort of American or German federal system that could work for the planet, and each region would have so many votes. I think that's, as Kant said, we have to have a federal solution to geopolitical problems. But how we're going to get that with China and the USA and Russia and Europe all sort of wanting their own power structures, let's think that through. That's what the World Intellectual Forum is to do, and find a rational way of dealing with it. How we don't deal with it is marching in Trafalgar Square, just protesting inanely against them. David Icke goes on about them, the system, and there's an anti-Semitic sort of thread running through David Icke's work. I mean, which has been running through the kind of racist agenda since the Protocols of the Elders of Science surfaced, and anti-Semitism, which was rife in many European countries. In France, it led to the Dreyfus Affair, and it led to massive pogroms in Russia. When in doubt, slaughter the Jews. I mean, it was a medieval Christian kind of fanatical thing as well. Whereas the Gnostic Christians, the Cathars, the intelligent ones, the intellectuals, were actually accused of being, in league with the Jews. Abelard, one of my great heroes, French intellectual, was in league with Jews and Muslims and Sufis. He was in correspondence with them about, can we agree to differ and work out the actual nature of God, please? Can we have an intelligent discourse about, let's compare and contrast the Trinity idea with different forms of the Tree of Life idea, the Sephiroth, and isn't the Sephiroth system of the Kabbalah sort of slightly Trinitarian? Jacob Boehmer said it was, and let's have a peace discussion about the inner lineaments and structures of God. Let's ask the Sufis to map their 99 names of God onto the Sephiroth, onto the Trinity, and let's agree to. At the end of the day, religion is like a work of art, okay, and it's got scientific elements. It's also got artistic elements. It's an aesthetic. You either get it or you don't, and if you don't get that formulation, well, then find your own or make your own up. That's what new religions do. So anyway, yeah, I feel sorry for my compatriots and to see sort of English fascist groups. I feel sorry, they've lost their way. The moral compass has gone haywire. These people, do they not obviously they don't know history. I mean, if anyone has studied the history of Europe as I have in great detail at the University of London, and travelling to every European country, meeting European historians and intellectuals for a long time now, and running philosophers of peace and historians of peace in Europe, I can assure you that kind of rhetoric of just sows and feeds into a narrative which is a sort of demonization of the other, and it's a demonization of internationalism and a demonization of peace, and a demonisation of the European Union, which is what led to Brexit. People like Icke and their sort of fascist and white supremacist cronies and anti-Semitic cronies, they were able to create this sort of tidal, false hysteria against the European Union, which convinced enough of the, sadly, my miseducated compatriots in Britain to click on buttons that led them to vote for Brexit. Now, I think the vast majority of people have realised it was a mistake and are trying to come back from that. I'll come back to that point a bit later, but yes, I've set up a new project, a website called the United Opposition to Brexit. And I've been following with interest the Liberal Democrat leadership elections, Layla Moran and Ed Davey, and Ed Davies won. I think that's probably a wise choice, although I felt closer intellectually to Layla Moran. She's a bright spark and a bit of a genius, a maths and physics teacher and a very clever woman. I think she'll have a good career in politics. I hope one day she'll be in high office. Ed Davy's a good man too, and he's doing his best to reach out to the mainstream British voters and say, look, guys, we've really gone down the wrong road with Brexit. And not just that, but the whole illiberalism of the Conservatives, the ineptitude, the incompetence, but there's a sinister, dark illiberalism at the heart of it, which is putting people in fear, cutting benefits, creating walls of immigration and racism, actually. And, you know, the nice blonde Boris Johnson persona of the racist fringe of the Conservative Party is shocking, in my opinion. And so has got to go. It's a matter of time. But somehow we have to get the Lib Dems and Labour and the Greens and Plaid and SNP to all come together in a grand alliance, and both in Parliament but also nationally in the next election. I think there's a lot of common ground they can find. One is a second referendum to stop Brexit. Another is, I think the Scots have to have their second independence referendum. It's the only fair way out of this. Whatever happens, the Scots have got to have the right to that sooner rather than later. And that's the price for SNP support in any kind of alliance to bring the Tories down, I think. Plaid Cymru have, again, you know, a great sense of custodianship of Welsh culture. And I don't think, I mean, I lived in Wales for many years. I love the country. I don't think Wales is being best served by the Brexiting Conservative, you know, party who've hijacked the Conservative Party. So I think, again, there needs to be a coming together, realising there's a universal common interest in a second referendum, but there has to be intellectual opposition to where it's come from. And in my analysis, you know, this has been engineered by somewhat dark and unpleasant forces connected with Steve Bannon and the rise of the right wing, neo-fascist movement, really, which is a white supremacist movement. And so I want to come on to this because if one is going to look critically across the pond at what's going on in America with this incredible polarization, the Black Lives Matter movement being, you know, attacked by Trump and his cronies, well, where are they coming from? I mean, of course Black Lives Matter, and of course policing should not discriminate and kill, you know, black people in the back, like that guy that was shot. And so in Britain, there would be a Royal Commission of Inquiry into the numbers of murders of black people by policemen. I mean, how many is it going on? Is it that shocking? And if so, what's the cause of it? Is it bad education in the police force? Is it bad training? Is it recruiting racist officers in the white supremacist lot? I don't think you should be allowed to be a police officer in America and be a member of a white supremacist gang, KKK, etc. You know, it just shouldn't be happening. Is it? I don't know. This is why we need a kind of commission of inquiry. I mean, I have a dear friend, Satyan Raja, who you know, has worked with the police and helped train and about racial sensitivity training. And, you know, a policeman is there to protect the entire community. That means all people, all cultures, all genders, all classes. And policing is, when it's done properly, a very noble and, you know, good profession. When it's misused, it can become a terrible thing in the hands of the wrong people. And what, for instance, happened in the police in Germany under the Nazis, when the Nazi Party seized power illegally, actually, and enacted unconstitutional things, they seized control of the police, and they had their own little militia movements, the brown shirts, who were working, you know, using terror tactics on the street. Well, that's all horrendous. Yeah, but you'll say, well, what's that got to do with America? Nothing like that's happening. Well, actually, you know, I have to share something I've been researching, which I find a bit shocking, to put it mildly. And that is that the links actually are stronger and deeper than we thought between, let's say, American racist white supremacy and the Nazi movement. So I want to share a few things I've been researching because I've been working on my book on religion and mathematics and I've been looking at sort of religious theories about evolution and where we come from, and the development of Darwinist thinking in the 19th century, and how that was used by anti-religious movements to create an alternative narrative that, no, God isn't responsible for creation. God didn't create mankind equally. No, God doesn't exist. What happened was nature came along, created evolution, and that's the survival of the fittest. And we, the white races, are the best at the game. We're the slave owners, the capitalists, have the biggest armies. So, white supremacy rules, eh? Well, shocking to say, that was the narrative of 19th century history. And it led to, it was challenged at the American Civil War. But the people that were arguing for that, a lot of them were, white supremacists, Confederacy supporters. And then it didn't go away. Just because the Union won, it didn't stop the thinking, it didn't stop the narrative. And as Darwinian evolutionary theory developed in the late 19th century and early 20th century, a lot of people seized on it as a kind of narrative to bolster their own tribal egos. So the British, have a problem with their own racism and their own white supremacy kind of ideology. The British Empire was the best in the world. It had the right to rule the world, to conquer India and everywhere else, half of Africa. And that was justified by these people, pseudo-scientists. A lot of them were into eugenics. So it was justified because it was the best people now going to be running the planet. And this fit in with that whole way of thinking. Now, one of the people that I found who was the arch proponent of this was a guy called Roland Fisher, who was a Darwinian theorist. Roland Fisher, who lived from, let me just get the figures here. He was based at University College, and he lived from 1890 to 1952, which is the sort of heyday of the scientific theories I'm talking about. And he was a statistician and a mathematician, so I've discovered him doing the research for my book on religion and maths, okay. Now, he was also an Anglican, but he was one of those bigoted Anglicans who thinks that the English are the best race in the world and that you can't challenge them, And he tried to prove it mathematically. He was part of a team at UNESCO in 1950 that was trying to come up with scientific arguments against racial superiority theories, and he actually dissented. He said, no, the whites are the best race. We can mathematically prove it. The blacks are inferior. They can't do maths. They can't think straight, type of arguments. And he was an active member of the Eugenics Society, who also argued that the poor, the working class, the ignorant, people with mental health should all be forcibly sterilised. Not just, should be forcibly sterilised. And he praised the American line that was taken on this. He influenced it because that's what they were doing in the America of the day, where people like Roland Fisher were running the scientific Darwinian sort of departments of evolutionary theory, and had kicked God off the campus. They kicked all ethics out of the window, utterly and totally. And so he is regarded, I should say, by Richard Dawkins as the greatest biologist and scientist since Charles Darwin. Which tells us all we need to know about Richard Dawkins and why he won't allow God into his theories, The God delusion, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The real story, if you want to really know what's going on here, look at Roland Fisher's life and work. Quite how he could reconcile his overtly racist theories with what he presumably called Christianity as an Anglican, who wrote articles in his parish magazine and things. How he could reconcile them is utterly and utterly beyond me. Now, he wrote The Genetical Theory of Natural Selection, which was a healing of the split between Darwin's theories and Gregor Mendel, and because Darwin knew no maths. There's not a single mathematical formula in the whole of the origin of the species I've discovered, working on my book on religion and maths, right? So Darwin's theory, always trotted out as scientific and all that, was actually not really. It had not a single bit of mathematical proof in its favour. It was all just hyperbolic speculation and theory, which had actually been pretty much disproved by lack of evidence in the fossil record for intermediary species. The whole of the argument of Darwin is that I'm just I'm a sort of a part of a long sea of species formation, and that humans are nothing special. We're just the latest monkey on the block, and we descend from a long line of monkeys which go back to mammals and so on and so on. Now the problem with the whole argument is that there's no intermediary species in the formation, and that's been pointed out. There are other problems, and I mean I'm not taking sides here. I'm saying there are intellectual problems with the Darwinian arguments as they're presented. And if you don't, well, one source you should look at is a very good documentary called Expelled, which talks about how people that question Darwinian biological theories are hounded out of academia in both Britain and America because it's become de rigueur. It's the only kind of theory in town. The problem with the Darwinian approach is it could be hijacked by people like Roland Fisher, but it also was hijacked by the Nazis, who it's not really studied. You can do the history of Nazi stuff, and it all focuses on the politics and Strasser and who's in and who's out. But actually, the fundamental core ideas were Darwinian, and I have a lot of books on this. There's a very good philosopher who studied Hitler's ethics, and that is all based on sort of Darwinian theory mixed with pseudo-occultish stuff, which my friend Nicholas Goodrick Clark did his PhD on, and so Hitler in his mind jumbled up everything. Now what's interesting, so this is all a bit worrying, let's put it like that. He was extremely conservative politically, Fisher, and he felt that the different races were totally different, and the different classes, and the superior ones should rule, including, so he was an arch-Tory conservative in Britain. Boris Johnson, he's probably written Boris Johnson's script for him behind the scenes. I mean, and Brexit, I think, is a continuation of this Fisherite view that the British have the right to rule the world, so, God, we've got to leave the European Union because we're the best. Well, pride goeth before a fall, and morality has the last laugh. I mean, I'm doing a commentary on the Quran at the moment, as you know, and I've done the Gospels, and I'm working through the world's spiritual scriptures, and there's a lot of wisdom in the Quran, and basically the summing up the messages, you can plot against God, but ultimately God has the last laugh. One of the great things of Islam is its anti-racism. It's got this amazing breadth of vision. Muhammad had many friends who were all different races, and he says, look, to be a Muslim is surrender to the one God. It's not sort of, racial triumphalism. We've won, we're the best, and our God is the best. No, it's finding the unity behind all the diversity. And so his first muezzin, Bilal, a black slave who was freed, was the most faithful of all his early Muslim companions. And look up Bilal's story, it's very moving. So Islam was an attempt by a prophet to steer humanity in a different direction from